Welcome, my dear friends. This is my final presentation, and with this course, I've said this a few times. I really do hope that it turns into something that is enjoyable for you. I've really over this last month, or especially this last 3 weeks, been basically, doing the dad thing during the day, and then whenever he goes to bed. And my wife now is, getting close to 8 months pregnant, so. She goes to bed decently early, and then at night I come escape down here to the basement and have been making the content. And I think that we've come a long way, and I know this course is going to be different than other courses you've taken, and whether it's that there's a little more of a maybe political slant to it. Sorry, my alarm sounds went off. But I'm trying to look at politics in this course from a bird's eye view. I'm never going to be the type of person to try to convince you, oh, you got to go vote for this person, you got to go do this. I don't almost care at that level. It's not that I don't care, that's not what I mean, but my goal is not to manipulate you. Actually, to be quite honest, my goal is to teach you methods of manipulation so that you're less manipulatable by other people. What's the Rosetta Stone? And how does this link to a modern age? And how does this link to you being less open to manipulation? The point I want to make is this point that's from the rapper Cannabis, actually, but to learn from your past or the future will punish you. It's a really deep sentence. And today we're going to be looking at these great works. Brave New World by Huxley. We're going to look at 1984 and Animal Farm by Orwell. We're going to look at Plato and his allegory of the cave, and Viktor Frankl's great book Man's Search for Meaning, which I know I've touched on, and I'm not going to recap what I've already touched on. I'm going to show it from a different angle and end with Solzhenitsyn and the Gulag Archipelago. Or if you haven't heard that word before, think of Gulag as meaning prison and archipelago meaning like a group of islands, but it's got this dark irony because here we're talking about this group of prison camps in northern Russia, in Siberia basically, work camps. That was this devastation that was happening. So basically this lecture in a way is sort of lessons from the 20th century and what we can learn from like World War I and World War II and the aftermath, and what happened in Nazi Germany, the terrible horrors that happened there, and the terrible horrors that happened in Stalinist Russia, in the USSR, in their quote unquote this dream for a red utopia, this communist utopia. And you could even look at what happened in communist China with Mao and the Great Leap Forward. If you ever want to have a depressing read, Google that term. What does the Great Leap Forward in China mean? The Great New Deal. What's the Great Leap Forward? The Brave New World. It was a cultural revolution where they basically, I can tell you a personal story about the Chinese Cultural Revolution. You might wonder how I have a personal story about that. For a long time in my life, my best friend before he died, and my kung fu teacher, Grandmaster Kung Fu Pan, who I met when I was 15, back in 95, and he passed away 3 years ago. I've been his longtime student ever since then. His teacher, okay, so again, I'm 2 people removed, so my teacher's teacher ran a martial arts school in China during this Great Leap Forward, aka the Cultural Revolution. And what's the Cultural Revolution? Well, they don't want the big olds. They don't want any old traditions. They don't want any old practices. So all of a sudden things like traditional Chinese arts, things like Kung Fu became immediately illegal. So my teacher remembers a time of the Maoist Guard, the Soviet police, or the basically Soviet police, but the communist version of that. It's actually, they took the ideas of Lenin So some people mistakenly classify things as like, oh, this looks like Marxist, but when you're using this political power as this force to cause disruption and using that to push this cognitive narrative, it's actually Leninism. That's what Lenin did. So my teacher remembers like the story of his master having his house ransacked, and they broke all the weapons, and they pulled down all this stuff. And this was like, this is a man that was a master of the ancient arts. And that became criminal. Because who they were as people became criminal. Because the individual became criminal. Because the party is what matters. You're what matters. The party is a manipulative concept. You're what matters. So I got onto my big rant there on the last slide and kind of lost my point that what is the Rosetta Stone? So for a long time, archaeology has been so fascinated with Egypt, and it's not confusing why people are fascinated with Egypt. I've been fascinated with Egypt forever. Egypt is, well, there's a video I made that you'll have access to now that I'm going to release these all at once, basically, but there's a video I made called Thoth's Prophecy, and it makes this point that Egypt's actually a metaphor for the whole world. What the story of Egypt is fascinating. And so anyway, so the early archaeologists were fascinated with Egypt, and were trying to figure out what these depictions meant, right? Because they had all these beautiful relics, and they would have these really advanced depictions, and what we now call hieroglyphics. But they couldn't read the hieroglyphics until one day they found this stone. And this stone was really significant because it had basically the same thing written on it, but in 3 languages. It was written in Greek, which they understood. It was written in this, it's spelt like it's demonic, but it's not demonic. It's like D-O-M-O-I-C or something like that. It's demonic, and it's like a ancient Egyptian, but not as ancient as the hieroglyphs, and they knew it. So now think about this for a sec. So this rock has the same thing. So let's just say it's like, well, literally the rock was at the beginning there. It's like a rock that I could set theoretically on this table, and it had 3 things written on it. 2 were in known languages, and 1 was in a different one, and that they didn't know hieroglyphics. And because they knew the 2, they could tell that those said the same thing. And since they could tell those said the same thing, they were able to use that to basically transcribe the third. Or not transcribe, translate is the word I meant to say. The third one, right? So that one stone allowed them to decipher hieroglyphics. Now people can read hieroglyphics. The point is, it's not the stone. The stone was a translational tool. The translational tool that I want to try to present today is some of the wisdom contained in these books by Huxley and by Orwell and by Plato and by Frankl and Solzhenitsyn, and that there's a lesson to be taught here. The lesson goes beyond Trump or Biden or whatever the next one will be, and the next one after that, and the next one after that, and it'll keep going like a pendulum, Democrat then Republican, then Democrat then Republican, and sometimes it's twice and then the other one, and everyone's going to be upset every single time, and it's that level of politics will make you sick, is my opinion. I think you take care of your family, you be as good of a person you can, you be involved in things that matter to you, and you realize that there's a lot of inauthenticity out there, but that doesn't mean you have to be fake. And this is getting me ahead of myself, but this is the great quote from Solzhenitsyn, the person that wrote the 6th one on that screen. The lie may come into the world, but don't let it come into the world through you. That's my plea to my students. The great Huxley once said that Men don't learn much from the lessons of history, and that's actually, well, he says, and that's the most important. Of all the lessons of history, the most important thing for you to know is that most people forget it. We repeat cycles. We do things over and over again, and we act surprised every time. You know, we go way too far one side politically, and then we wonder why there's this massive boomerang to the other side. Maybe your crazy, wild, new idea isn't what everyone else wants to do. And maybe what everyone else wants to do isn't what you want to do. And maybe what makes you interesting is actually you, and not your ability to have hive mind. That's why I'm spending time today talking about what happened in Russia, and why to me it's so important to distinguish between Soviet, which to me means the government controlling the geographical area of Russia at the time, and Russians, which to me means the people. I have a deep, for someone that was born in Canada and has lived my whole life in Canada, and I've never been to Russia, I feel like I actually understand the Russian mind to a certain degree because of, well, and this is the gift of reading, right? Like, because I've read, Crime and Punishment, and I've read Dostoevsky and some Tolstoy and Solzhenitsyn, and been able to kind of understand that. And you'll notice if you get into Russian literature, there's a real deep, bitter, but resistant tone to it. They've been through it. No one that's been through a communist situation is going to try to sell you on the joys of communism. That's going to come from someone that's never experienced it, guaranteed. In Eastern European countries, communism's a dead dog because they saw it. They saw it. It destroyed their families. They saw what happened to the kulaks, the farmers in Ukraine, when all of a sudden being a successful farmer became criminal, and they were imprisoned, and it resulted in the deaths of tens of millions of people in the Ukraine. If you want to Google it, just Google the Ukrainian famine. It's like this is the real life implications of people's bad ideas. Right? And again, please keep in mind, I understand that 99% of your teachers are probably much more socialist friendly than I am, because I've spent a lot of my time, again, being trained by a Chinese martial artist, Grandmaster Kung Fu Pan, who was very cynical about the Maoist government, and then also being a huge fan of Russian literature and Dostoevsky. So anyways, my point is that I'm trying to make here, these are warning signals. We're going to talk about Brave New World and 1984 now, and these two books are so essential. It's such a controversy that they're not taught anymore. Which is why I make sure that every student that comes through my program at Conestoga can write book reports on both books. And why I'm about to present this to you. Love you guys. I really hope that this course is something that you care about, but I'm going to just do it the best as I can. I actually do care about your life. Brave New World, the Great Leap Forward, the New Deal, the new normal, right? This promise of this like future situation. You won't have any fears or worries, and everything will be taken care of, and it's this brave new world. What a brutal, or what a impactful image of the person within the medication tablet. Brave New World was written in 31, published in 32. Alright, so like basically right before World War II. And Huxley's looking at this idea of the main point I want to make is that this book in 1984 are both dealing with control, both dealing with a situation where the government is controlling people. How the government is doing that is very different in these books. Later we're going to get to 1984. In that book, the government's controlling people by force. That's where we get words like Big Brother and the thought police and thought crimes. In Brave New World, though, they're creating this fake world that's almost so attractive that you can't resist it. There's nothing for you to worry about. If you feel sad, you take this. You know, sexuality is completely disturbed. You're supposed to have sex with everybody and not care. And don't single down with one person. That's disgusting. Don't have kids. That's gross. Fatherhood? I can't think of a more disgusting thing. I'm obviously being facetious. This is like kind of the message of the book. It's this. Now remember, this isn't Huxley's message. This is Huxley writing a book that's supposed to represent a warning that's saying, like, be careful of these attempts to destroy a family. Be careful of how core that is to what you actually are as a human being. Be careful of this idea of all you need in your life is the ability to handle bad moods and an iPad that has every app you could ever want. It's like, okay. So basically, Brave New World's saying, you don't force it. You give them bread and circus. Brave New World warns the dangers of giving the state, government, control over new and powerful technologies. One illustration of this theme is the rigid control over reproduction through technological and medical intervention. So the whole book starts with them at the fertilization center and this discussion of how child rearing is now something completely done by the state, and even they remove ovaries from certain women that are allowed to provide their ovaries. Everyone else is sterilized. It's this rigid control of reproduction. At the same time, everyone's given these complicated entertainment machines. Remember, this was written in 1931. You know, today we could just say everyone's given like a souped up iPad with every app they could ever want that generates both harmless leisure and these high levels of consumption and production that are the basis of stability in this new world, right? Everyone's always getting their new iPhone 8 and then their iPhone 9, then 10, then 11, then 12, then 13. And have you heard about 14? But you haven't heard, I bet, yet about 15, and 16 is going to be amazing. And then this idea of Soma, or they're always taking this drug, Soma. This kind of medical, biological, psychological technology. And I'm going to talk about kind of what some people think that Soma in this book means, like literally this emotion suppressing substance, and some people think it's metaphorical. And I think you could make an argument for both. And I think in a way Huxley sort of meant it as both. You might notice a bit of a space kind of binaural beat sound. I've been doing work here, and there's just a little bit of like this, like in some of the first slides, a little bit of I don't know, kind of hum or something. So I'm trying to counter that. I hope it doesn't sound too bad. All right. So yeah, Brave New World. So what I want to do is I have a couple of things like this, and back when I was in high school, there was a thing called Cole's Notes. So say if you had like a project and you had a test on Shakepeare, like on Hamlet. I almost said omelet. On Hamlet, like say on Monday, and you haven't read the book, you can read Cole's Notes, and it gives you like the point form, like in 3 pages, the whole story. It's like this thing I want to show you now, this Spark Note, is sort of like that. It's going to give you the depiction of what happened in the book, but keep in mind, like, one of the things that's so interesting about a book like Brave New World is that it does such a great job showing the inner thoughts and struggles and anxieties of the protagonist, of the main character of Watson. And so, or sorry, Watson's 1984, of Winston in Brave New World. And so the depiction is going to just be a little bit more point by point. Okay, but I think it's important, especially if you haven't read the book, to kind of have an idea of the actual story plot line.
Brave New World is about a futuristic society that has tried to create a perfect community where everyone is happy. They use science to mass-produce people, and condition them to do and want only the things they're supposed to. But in doing that, they take away freedoms, like the freedom to think for oneself. The few characters we see who do think for themselves aren't happy, so the novel poses a question. Is it better to be happy or free? The book starts with the director of the Central London Hatching and Conditioning Center explaining to a group of students how they create people, since women don't actually get pregnant anymore. Eggs are fertilized and then undergo a process that causes the fertilized eggs to divide. They can get up to 96 identical twins from a single fertilized egg this way. The director brings the group into one of the conditioning rooms. Nurses lay out flowers and books and then bring in a group of babies. Then they shock the babies through an electrified strip in the floor. Over time, the babies will learn to instinctively dislike books and nature. These babies are deltas, one of the society's lower castes, and the lower castes perform non-intellectual jobs like factory work. By conditioning the delta babies to hate books, the society ensures that they won't ever have any desire for them, and by conditioning them to hate flowers and nature, they'll want to stay near their work in the cities. They condition all the castes this way, according to what their role will be in the community. The group continues into an outdoor garden, where several hundred naked children are engaged in erotic play. This play conditions the children to grow up feeling comfortable being sexually promiscuous. The group runs into Mustafa Mond, a very powerful man and one of the 10 world controllers. He tells them what it was like in the past, when mothers gave birth to children and people grew up in families, and adults still paired off into monogamous couples. Everyone is really grossed out by the idea of mothers and families. The story cuts to Lena and Bernard. Bernard is a psychologist. Even though he's a member of the highest caste, he feels like an outsider, because he's smaller and looks different than most men in his caste. He likes Lanina, but it bothers him that she acts like everyone else. He and Lanina are planning a trip to a savage reservation in New Mexico, but tonight she has a date with Henry Foster. Lanina leaves for her date, and a man named Benito Hoover walks over and talks about how attractive Lanina is. Bernard gets annoyed, so Benito offers him Soma, which is a drug that everyone takes to feel happy and kind of stoned. Bernard just turns and walks away. Bernard picks up his friend, Helmholtz Watson. Helmholtz feels he has something important inside him that he wants to let out through his writing, but he doesn't know what it is or how to write it. Bernard and Helmholtz both feel like they're different. This shared sense of being different creates a bond between them. That night, Bernard attends Solidarity service, which is kind of like church. All the people sing hymns together and praise their prophet and await the coming of a greater being. The prophet they're praising is Henry Ford, who introduced the assembly line and revolutionized mass production. And they all take Soma to feel like they're dissolving into one unified whole. Finally, they break out into dance, then dim the lights and have an orgy, while a voice says a refrain that begins with the phrase, "Orgy porgy." Lanina remembers the first time she and Bernard went out together. He stopped their helicopter over the English Channel to watch the waves below. He said the sea made him feel like he was an individual. Lanina felt shocked and angry with him, so Bernard gave up and took her back to his apartment, where they took Soma and had sex. Bernard goes to the director of the Hatching and Conditioning Center to get permission to visit the Savage Reservation in New Mexico. The director gets upset, and he tells Bernard about his own trip to the reservation many years earlier. He went with a woman, and on the last day of their trip, they rode horses up a mountain. After lunch, he took a nap, and when he woke up, she was gone. A terrible thunderstorm broke out, and the lightning scared the horses. He hurt his knee trying to catch them, but they ran off. The next day, they searched for the woman, but she was never found. He ends the meeting by telling Bernard he's very unhappy with Bernard's behavior, and threatens to relocate him to Iceland. Bernard and Lanina go to the Savage Reservation, and witness a ritual where a young man must remain silent while he's whipped. The square empties out, and a young savage approaches Bernard and Lanina. Unlike the others, he's white, and he speaks English. This savage, whose name is John, wanted to be whipped, to prove he's a man and to sacrifice his body for the village. He explains that his mother, Linda, wasn't from the reservation. She had been visiting with a man, and while on a walk in the mountains, she fell down a ravine and hit her head. Some hunters from the village found her and carried her back. She was already pregnant with John, who was born and raised in the village. Bernard remembers the director's story. John takes them to see his mother. She's thrilled to see civilized people and tells them how awful it is on the reservation, with the women having babies all the time, and the people pair off into couples and only have sex with that person. Outside, John tells Bernard about his childhood in the village. His mother often got drunk and slept with a man named Popeye. John hated him, and he remembers the time when some of the village women held his mother down and whipped her because she kept sleeping with their husbands. But Linda taught John to read, and one day Popeye brought him a copy of the complete works of Shakespeare. John read the book all the time because he loved the language and to deal with his loneliness. Bernard invites John to come back to London with them, and he says Linda can come too. He knows he can use her as leverage against the director. Lanina feels so stressed from everything that she takes a bunch of Soma and spends a day asleep. John comes looking for Bernard and finds her there. He's been in love with her since he first saw her. He wants to touch her, but he won't allow himself to. They all arrive back in London, and Bernard is called to come see the director at work. The director announces that to keep Bernard from infecting others with his unorthodoxy, he's sending him to Iceland. But Bernard calls Linda in, and she immediately recognizes the director, and says that she had a baby because of him. John comes in and falls to his knees in front of the director, calling him my father over and over. The director is horrified. It's obscene to talk about pregnancy, and shameful to be called a father. And all the workers laugh hysterically like it's all a dirty joke, until the director runs out of the room. Bernard starts to show John what life in London is like, and John becomes instantly famous. His celebrity makes Bernard popular too. Linda, meanwhile, does nothing but lie in bed and take Soma. One evening, Lanina takes John to the Feelies, which are like movies that engage all the senses, so you can actually feel and smell what's happening. The Feely involves a lot of casual sex, and afterward, they go back to Lanina's apartment. But John is unhappy. He leaves, and Lanina still can't understand why he won't sleep with her. On the night of Bernard's biggest party, which several important officials have agreed to attend, John refuses to come out of his room. Bernard has to tell all his guests that the savage won't be appearing. The guests are furious. During his brief popularity, Bernard had stopped speaking with Helmholtz Watson. But he goes to see Helmholtz after his public embarrassment, and the two become friends again. When Helmholtz and John meet, they're instantly close. Helmholtz, who has been trying to express his emotions through rhymes, hears Shakespeare for the first time. John's refusal to sleep with Lanina has Lanina thinking of him constantly. Finally, she decides to act and goes to his apartment. She marches in, and when John mentions marriage, she's horrified. She decides to take her clothes off and get him into bed. He becomes enraged and calls her a whore. Lanina runs into the bathroom to hide. John gets a phone call about his mother and leaves. Linda is at the hospital, and as John tries to speak to her, she keeps dozing off because she's on a high dose of Soma. Making the situation worse, several young boys who are in the room for death conditioning keep gawking at her. Then Linda dies, and as John rushes out of the room, he shoves one of the boys over in a rage. In the hospital's vestibule, John runs into a group of workers getting their Soma rations. He freaks out and starts shouting that Soma is poison. He says they're all slaves, and he's going to make them free. Then he starts throwing the Soma out the window. Bernard and Helmholtz get a call and go to find John at the hospital. When they get there, a brawl is going on. Helmholtz jumps in to help John, while Bernard basically can't decide what to do. John, Bernard, and Helmholtz are brought to Mustafa Mond, who explains to them why old things like Shakespeare are prohibited. First, society needs people to want new things, not old ones. People have to keep buying and consuming for the sake of the economy. You also can't write or understand tragedies without social instability, and social instability no longer exists. They've made everyone happy, and engineered a perfect society where everyone plays a role exactly suited to their desires and abilities. Mond says sometimes people don't fit in their roles. He was one of those people. He had the choice of being sent away to an island or joining a program to become a world controller. Bernard and Helmholtz are going to be sent to islands with other people who don't fit in. Bernard freaks out and is escorted from the room. Helmholtz goes to check on him, and Mond and John keep talking. Mond says they've also gotten rid of God. God and religion are only compatible with a society where people get old and suffer losses. God and religion also lead to self-denial. But modern industrial civilization only works when people indulge every desire. It keeps people buying things, and it keeps them from ever feeling any real passion or frustration, which can lead to instability. When they do feel something, they have Soma to keep them happy. John says he doesn't like it. He would rather be free to suffer losses, get sick, and grow old. So Bernard and Helmholtz are sent to different islands, and John goes to live in a deserted lighthouse in the countryside. He enjoys living alone, but he thinks he enjoys it too much, so he whips himself as punishment. Crowds and reporters start turning up at the lighthouse, demanding that the savage do his whipping stunt. Eventually, a huge crowd appears, and they end up beating one another in front of John's house while chanting "Orgy Porgy." When John wakes up the next day, he remembers everything and feels horrified. When the crowd comes back that night, they find him hanging. For more information about Brave New World, check out the Brave New World SparkNote at sparknotes.com.
It's important to understand that Brave New World is not simply a warning about what could happen to society if things go wrong. It's also a satire of the society in which Huxley existed, and which still exists today. While the attitudes and behaviors of the world state citizens at first appear bizarre, cruel, or scandalous, many clues point to the conclusion that the world state is simply an extreme, but logically developed version of our society's economical values, in which the individual's happiness is defined as the ability to satisfy needs, and success as a society is equated with economic growth and prosperity. Not things like actual value or humanity or relationship or the things that actually sustain us. I wanted to show you some of this artwork because you can see these are kind of two different. The middle one is from a movie adaptation of Brave New World that was kind of weak, but I just wanted to show how you can see the obvious medicalization aspect or medication kind of aspect of this. Take a trip. You see that's obviously like a pill. And there's this tension in the book. Because some of these people that are kind of side characters in the book are having this very kind of drugged experience where anything negative comes up, they just take this Soma and they forget about it, and then they go back to just their casual sex and their, partying and their entertainment machines. And one of the kind of questions that's not actually asked, but that's kind of presented to the reader is, what's wrong with that? Is freedom a reasonable price for happiness? Again, I would remind that this book is presented as a warning. So within the book Brave New World, the drug Soma is this symbol that's used to represent instant gratification. It's also sort of a symbol for the powerful society and technology of the government, right? It's like, don't worry your pretty little head. Just take this and everything will be okay. And one of the points this book really is trying to highlight is, what is the psychological cost of that level of dependency and lack of autonomy and lack of industry and lack of all these things that we talked about as actually core developmental aspects. There's actually the idea that there is no identity except the identity of the party. So we could probably go basically through Erikson's points one by one and see how this is a corruption of it. And when describing that last slide, I just kind of stumbled into referencing Erikson unplanned there. But it's actually pretty interesting because you can also look at keep going with Erikson and look at identity, intimacy, integrity, generativity. All these things are gone in this scenario. It's just about personal need satisfaction. And my warning, I guess, or not mine, Huxley's warning with that is that that's so shallow that will not get you through a hard day. It's like if you're having a great day, fine, go enjoy your iPad. No amount of Netflix is going to help when you feel like you're in an existence that lacks substance. It seems undeniable that most of the world state members are happy. Although people that like John and Bernard and Helmholtz, like the kind of three of the main characters, might be criticizing their situation. So this is kind of an interesting thing, that one of the driving forces in both this book and in 1984 is this sense by the main character that things are wrong, that things are fake. Discuss then the relationship between truth and happiness and the use of Soma. Right, so since this is not live, I would just have you think about that. And how intense is that image? Right, of the guy just doing his periodical check on these developing fetuses in this very Matrix looking thing. Again, Brave New World, I don't know, I said again, but I don't think I've actually said this yet. If someone took Brave New World and ran with it, and by someone I mean say if you could get I don't know, I'm gonna date myself, but just like a huge star like Leonardo DiCaprio or someone like that to play Bernard, and then like get someone else really famous to play John. This would be one of the biggest blockbuster movies ever, because so many people, anyone my age or older, read this in school. Right, so it's like, anyways, that's a weird side note, but I just think Brave New World and 1984. 1984, there's a relatively recent, like maybe 20-year-old or so version that's not bad. It's watchable. Then there's an even older version that's weak. The Brave New World movie is pretty weak, unfortunately, because the books are pure dynamite. You know, they're two of the, as you can tell by my kind of long rants here, maybe the two most important books in understanding things like power and language and government, and the relationship between people and government, and the relationship between people, government, power, and language. One of the ways that in Brave New World, the idea is like, don't engage. And I think that's such a powerful picture of those two kids staring at a screen that just says, don't think. Infantizing the citizens means like treating the adult citizens like they're infant children. We know what's best for you. I almost made a joke about like we gotta wear 4 masks now. It's just like everything's like, people get sick of that, of being talked to like they're children. And, you know, not to get political on that, because I could have used a million different examples, and let's just move on from that, because again, like, what worries me isn't necessarily anybody's opinion on it, but the fact that people are using the fact that people have different opinions to tear apart families. You know, there's nothing more Soviet than that. And there's nothing more Brave New World, or more specifically, there's nothing more 1984 than that. There's nothing more Gulag Archipelago than that. Be careful about, you know, using some directive from the government as a reason to lose friends or family. It's so regrettable. The world state infantizes its citizens by allowing them instant gratification, denying any kind of responsibility. It assigns every citizen to a caste and particular social function before birth. It encourages its citizens to use Soma regularly, seek instant sexual gratification, to have no identity independent of the state. Your government is yourself. So here's another important Huxley warning, is he's warning about this like fake equality. So in the book Brave New World, the women in Brave New World have equality and are liberalized in some sense, right? Like maybe socially, and especially in terms of sexuality, and quite literally being encouraged and rewarded to be promiscuous and all this kind of stuff. But in terms of politics, in terms of work, and there's still very much this power disequilibrium or unbalance. And I think that Huxley's trying to show something there, to be careful of the people that are saying that they're for everyone being equal. Like, okay, so this is where I gotta be careful, right? Because it's like, people that actually think that, I don't have a problem with, right? Like, if you actually think that, you know, we should be creating a fairer world, then, you know, we should do this and this, it's like, okay, well, that's actually coming from your heart. You might actually be a good person. What becomes problematic is when people use that language because it works on people, and they use it to do specific things that aren't coming from that good place of your heart. And when people use language like, we're going to treat everyone the same, to actually devalue womanhood, devalue family, it's, and this is, we're going to get to Orwell in a second, but this is classic. When people say Orwellian, they often say that wrong, because Orwellian is really about specifically that language. It's how Orwell wrote about how language is used to manipulate people. People sometimes will mistakenly refer to any kind of government overreach as Orwellian, but Orwellian specifically refers to the use of language to purposely manipulate. Right? It's like on paper everybody's equal. It doesn't matter. They're less concerned with the fact that like the depression caused by not having any kind of stability, that with the lack of family, the ripple effect. But the thing is it's not that they don't care. They actually do care, and they actually care from the other side. They care from the side of manipulation. They know that that family that actually gives a crap about you and that might actually be a solid foundation is actually a threat to their attempt to manipulate and control and brainwash you. Let's just be blunt. Brave New World abounds with references to sex. It's full of it. At the heart of the world state control of its population is this rigid control over sexual mores. So think of a more as like a norm is what is kind of considered normal. A more is that same idea, but the M represents the word moral, right? So moral meaning right or wrong. So it's like what the people in a society think is right or wrong. Like in Brave New World, the idea of like two people getting together and having a kid and raising that kid is considered outdated and quite literally gross. And remember, gross is an important word. You've heard me say this before, that in some ways it's the most powerful emotion. And you gotta hear my whole sentence here before reacting, because it's like saying like Hitler didn't hate the Jewish people, he was disgusted by them. That's a very important thing to know about World War II. It's a very important thing to know about depersonalization. And that it's easiest to depersonalize people that we find disgusting. And the disgust response is a measurable psychological variable. I'm not just randomly picking a word. The research on it is, as solid as any behavioral science research. If I want you to be mean towards people, or if I want you to let me be mean towards people, I need to make you find them disgusting. Maybe physically, maybe attitudinally, maybe religiously, maybe politically, maybe behaviorally. Because as soon as you start seeing them as disgusting, you start seeing them as not human. And that's a very dangerous psychological perspective, because it justifies all kinds of things. And if you want a real book about that, you should read the book called Ordinary Men. And Ordinary Men is a devastating book about a group of Polish soldiers. Actually, at the beginning of the book, they're normal Polish police officers. By the end of the book, they're some of the worst concentration camp guards you can ever imagine. And the book, step by step, goes how these guys that were decent family people that played sports on the weekend, that would have beers with their friends and have a barbecue, how these people became some of the worst prison guards of all time. By these small acts of not saying no to lies. How do ordinary men get corrupted? I can see the book right there. Here, hang on a second. I'll tell you the author. Can't think of it. Christopher Browning. Just exactly how it sounds. Browning, like Browning. Christopher Browning wrote a book called Ordinary Men. It's worth the read. It's certainly worth the read, because it really addresses this question of how can good people do bad things. Another really interesting dynamic in Brave New World is this idea that there's these two seemingly paradoxical or opposite situations where the people are in this position where there's total conformity. So motif or theme or whatever. There's total conformity, but at the same time, so everyone has to say the same thing and stand up and do the same actions and, bow at the right time and do this at the right time and line up the right way and say the right words and not say the wrong words and not. There's this total conformity, but at the same time, everyone feels completely psychologically isolated and alienated. So there's this point of the book that's really stressing that those two things are connected. There's a connection between this total conformity, hive mind, mass psychosis, and this felt sense of alienation. The motive of alienation is one of the driving forces of the narrative. It provides the main character with their primary motivations. Now that's actually true in Brave New World and also in 1984, which we're going to look at next. So just a quick note to my students, sorry again if you can hear that kind of like annoying, just maybe I shouldn't keep pointing this out to your ears, but like that little bit of hum from my computer. My computer's been working overtime. It's been in its own kind of computer boot camp this week. Every night it's been rendering big files for me, so for the YouTube channel, so I'll give it some grace. That little computer got me through this year. I'm gonna have to probably get another different one before next year, but you know, technological, talking about getting a new computer. Technological progress has merely provided us more efficient means to go backwards, and this is one of Huxley's points. It's like, wow, you have an amazing iPad and don't know your neighbor. And that was kind of one of his points, like we have these things that are shiny and new, but is that what matters? How's that for a creepy picture, that hand reaching out of the test tube?
"1984 is about totalitarianism. A totalitarian government is one that tries to control every aspect of life. How people spend every minute of their time, even in private, who they can associate with, what they're allowed to say. A totalitarian government even tries to control what people think and what they believe. George Orwell wrote 1984 in the late 1940s. What he knew about totalitarianism was based on the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. Those governments had come into being not that long before, and they weren't very well understood yet. What Orwell was trying to do with 1984 was to give his readers a clear picture of what life would be like if a free country like England were under totalitarian rule. 1984 takes place in London. The London in the book is a depressing place. There's never enough to eat, the food's disgusting, there aren't enough clothes or shoes or anything to go around, and the city is pretty dilapidated, except for these giant pyramid-shaped government buildings that rise above the landscape. There's some sort of war going on, though no one really understands what it's about. Rockets frequently explode in the streets and blow people to bits. The worst part is that the government is always watching everything people do. There are these posters of Big Brother, who's supposedly the leader of the government, that say, "Big Brother is watching you." There are thought police who have hidden cameras and microphones literally everywhere. The government can watch you in your home, through your TV screen, and you're not allowed to turn your TV off, ever. There are a lot of things you're not allowed to do in this society, and if you do them, the police might take you away and throw you into a forced labor camp. You're not allowed to have close friends, you're not allowed to be in love, you can't date or have sex with someone you like. You're basically supposed to save all your emotional energy for the party being the government. Then there are things you have to do. You have to watch the government programming on TV, most of its news, some of its exercises. You have to attend pep rallies, including this one called the 2 Minutes Hate. So it's hard to even have time to think your own thoughts, because they're constantly filling your head with propaganda. The main character of 1984 is Winston Smith. He's 39, he has a job in the government, and he lives this horrible, dreary existence without any friends or anyone in his life. At the beginning of the book, he starts writing a diary to talk about how much he hates life in his society, even though writing a diary is one of those things you'd be killed for doing if you were caught. The diary is his place for thinking about his society. It's a place where he tries to imagine if life could possibly be different from the way it is. There's no way for him to know if things were ever different before, because the government has changed all the records of the past and rewritten all the history books. At the beginning of the novel, there are two other people who matter to Winston, and he doesn't even know either of them. One of them is Julia. Julia is this attractive young woman who works in the same building as him. She's some kind of mechanic. Winston basically hates her. He hates her because she's pretty and he can't have her, but he also thinks she's the sort of person who would turn him into the thought police. So he's afraid of her, but also sort of fascinated. The other person he's interested in is this portly guy named O'Brien, who's a member of the inner party. That means he's a boss, much higher up than Winston. Winston should be afraid of this guy, but he gets the sense that O'Brien is intelligent, so he has this yearning to be friends with him. He thinks O'Brien would understand how he feels about life. The book takes a turn one day when Julia slips Winston a note that says, "I love you." This note completely rocks Winston's world. Of course he's interested. He can't wait to get in touch with her. But it's very hard for them to say 2 words to each other in private with all these spies and cameras everywhere. Finally, they do manage to get out to the country, and they start this mad love affair. The love affair makes them both very happy. It's dangerous because they could be killed or sent to labor camps if they get caught, but that makes it more exciting. At last, Winston has someone who understands him and who hates the party as much as he does. But Winston needs to go that extra step. He's rebelling against the party privately by having the secret affair. Now he wants to go to the next level and be an active rebel against the government. He gets his chance one day, when O'Brien invites him to his apartment to look at something work-related. Winston takes a leap of faith and guesses that O'Brien must be part of the rebellion, because no one invites people over to their home. It just isn't done. So he and Julia go to O'Brien's house and confess that they want to be rebels. And O'Brien says, "Yes, I'm a rebel too," and we all read this book that explains why things are the way they are. Winston reads the book, and he's blown away by it. Unfortunately, right after he reads it, the thought police bust in and arrest him and Julia and carry them off to the Ministry of Love to torture them. So we learn that O'Brien wasn't a rebel after all. He just wanted to catch Winston. In the Ministry of Love, they torture Winston in all sorts of horrible ways. They break his bones in his teeth, they use electric shock, they starve him, and on and on. He tells them everything he knows, he confesses to everything they ask him, and he tells them everything he knows about Julia. After torturing him over and over, O'Brien finally tells Winston what it is that the government really wants. What they want is to have total power over the minds of people like Winston. They want people like Winston to say 2 + 2 = 5 and really believe it, not just say it to avoid a beating. For the government, it's purely an exercise in power. They're not trying to control his mind for some other purpose. They just want to exercise total power over people's minds. They finally do break Winston completely, in this place called Room 101, where they do whatever it is you're most afraid of. They lock his face into a cage and threaten to let these rats eat their way through his face. He has a phobia of rats, so he loses it and says, "Do it to Julia, not me," which is a complete betrayal of what's most important to him. The government has taken his last shred of integrity. After he does that, they let him and Julia go. The thought police don't care about them anymore. The two of them meet on the outside, but they can't love each other anymore. Winston and Julia are basically broken people after they get out. Winston has changed to the point that he doesn't even want to think about anything that might be rebellious. He just sits in a cafe listening to the news and smiling. The last words of the novel are, "He loved Big Brother." So, one of the points the book makes is that a human being can be broken down completely until he'll believe whatever you tell him, even if it's that 2 + 2 = 5. At the same time, the book has a positive message, which is that it's really hard to get inside someone's head to that extent. The government has to go to incredible lengths to brainwash Winston successfully. For more information about 1984, check out the SparkNote to it on sparknotes.com.
So that video again was to give you an overview, and I wanted to really point something out because I didn't really touch on it in that video. You'll notice how Winston's in this apartment that has this massive, what we would now just call like a smart TV basically on the wall that's running like a FaceTime or whatever app constantly that you're not allowed to turn off. But he's found this one corner, this one area in his room that if he sets his chair in this at this specific angle, you can see in the picture, it depicts it perfectly, that the screen can't see him. And he's also found that there's this brick in the wall that, if he wiggles just right, can come out. And so he's went and he's purchased this illegal diary. Now remember, he could be killed for this. And so there's these intense scenes in the book that are hard to kind of show in a movie, because it's like this, like a lot of great books. And I had mentioned earlier in this presentation, the Russian writers like Dostoevsky and like Crime and Punishment. It's like that book is, the entire book is basically the main character's Raskolnikov or whatever, I forget it. Raskolnikov, I think is how you say his name. And he, without telling you the story, kind of commits this crime and is living with the aftermath. And it's like his anxieties and his internal dialogue represents such a core aspect of the story. And in this one, it's Winston sits down and he wants to write something. He's going to do this. He's going to do this criminal act, this act of defiance. He starts writing, and he writes about a page and a half, and he reads it back to himself, and it's just some BS, like, propaganda story about this, like, hero of the party that does blah, 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 and he realizes that's just, like, propaganda BS. That's just, like, a thought that's not even my own, and he rips it up. He's sitting there, like, struggling to think of something to write, and there's this, like, super powerful moment where he writes, I exist. As the novel opens, Winston feels frustrated by the oppression and rigid control of the party, which prohibits free thought and sex and any expression of individuality. Winston dislikes the party and has illegally purchased a diary in which to write his criminal thoughts, like I exist. He's also become fixated on this powerful party member, which you saw in that video, O'Brien, whom Winston believes is a secret member of the Brotherhood, and who you also saw in that video is eventually his torturer at the end. The Brotherhood, this. So in the book, there's this kind of this rumor of these people that are against the government, the Brotherhood. The mysterious legendary group working to overthrow the party. Like Orwell's 1984, Brave New World depicts a dystopia in which an all-powerful state controls the behavior and actions of its people in order to preserve its own stability and power. But a major difference between the two is that whereas in 1984 control is maintained by this constant government surveillance, secret police, torture, and power, in Brave New World it's maintained through technological intervention that start from before birth and last until death, and that actually change what people want. The government in 1984 maintains power through force and intimidation. The government of Brave New World retains control through making its citizens so happy and superficially fulfilled they don't care about their personal freedom. In Brave New World, the consequence of state control are a loss of dignity, morals, values, emotions, in short, a loss of humanity.